My name is Grace Almanza. I am the School and Tour Programs Manager here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. I want to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude, in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I would like to extend a thank you to our members and donors who are here today. Your support made this event possible. And if you're not yet a member and enjoy this program, please consider joining today. You can visit gokm.org/membership to learn more. Throughout this talk, you may place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. For the duration of this lecture, however, the chat has been disabled. Please note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum's website in about a week's time. This will be sent to all registrants of the lecture via email. Captions in English are available. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this morning, Giustina Renzoni. She joined the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2018 as the Curator of Historic Properties. She oversees tours, programs, and exhibitions connected to Georgia O'Keeffe's 2 historic homes. Previously, Giustina has held a variety of museum positions at the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver, Denver Art Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. In addition, as a contemporary art curator, Giustina has organized exhibitions highlighting up-and-coming local artists for galleries in Boston and Colorado. She received her BA in Cultural Anthropology from Northeastern University, Boston, and an MA in Art History from University of Colorado, Boulder, focusing on colonial visual culture and printmaking. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Giustina.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Grace, and good morning, everyone. We have a really exciting topic this morning. I'm going to be speaking with you about Georgia O'Keeffe's international travels. So to start, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so we have an exhibition on view currently at the O'Keeffe Welcome Center in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and it is titled Around the World with O'Keeffe. If you've not seen it yet, don't worry, you have plenty of time to come visit us. This exhibition will be open to the public until April 1st, 2024. What's so great about this is this exhibition is actually free as well. So the Welcome Center itself is open to the general public for free, Tuesdays through Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And although this is the starting point of the O'Keeffe Home and Studio Tours, the tours only run till November, but the Welcome Center itself is open year-round. So there are no reservations needed to come see the exhibitions, although I always like to remind everybody that if you would like to tour Georgia O'Keeffe's home and studio, the home and studio is only accessible through guided tour, and those guided tours must be made with advanced reservations. And at this point in our tour season, we are typically sold out a few weeks in advance. So if you are planning to visit us here in Abiquiu and you'd like to visit the home and studio, do contact us, visit our website, and purchase your tickets as soon as possible. So Georgia O'Keeffe was a consummate traveler. She started traveling internationally as early as the 1920s. At that time, a lot of people traveled typically by train or by boat if they were going to be leaving the country. Now, in the 1950s, that's when O'Keeffe really starts traveling internationally quite a bit as airline travel became increasingly more available. So over the course of her lifetime, from the 1930s until the 1980s, O'Keeffe traveled to 49 different countries on almost every continent in the world. Her final trip was in 1983 at the age of 96, when she traveled to Costa Rica. Now, during her travels, O'Keeffe would often bring home souvenirs, design inspiration, and household objects. So this ranged from postcards to textiles to cooking ingredients, really anything that you would find yourself purchasing today on your own travels, O'Keeffe herself would purchase and bring home with her. Now, here in this photo is actually my favorite object in the exhibition. This is really what catalyzed my interest in exploring this topic a bit further. Here you actually see a small portfolio that O'Keeffe received when she took her first trip to East Asia in 1959 on Japan Airlines. So if you were traveling in first class like Miss O'Keeffe did, you would have received this portfolio, and inside you would have had your Japan Airlines stationery, along with this selection of matchbooks advertising different businesses in Tokyo. And it's just so wonderful to have all these little matchbooks that are a combination of mid-century design, more traditional looking design, and it's really quite a variety. Now, travel became a lot more accessible in mid-20th century, especially here in the United States. During World War II, there were a lot of advances in air technology. And so this allowed people to travel across the globe much faster and much easier than they ever could have before. Now, when you would travel, truly here in the mid-century, we're starting to see airlines competing with one another. So in order for these airlines to compete with one another, they started coming up with different marketing and different branding to make themselves stand out from the other competitors. Now, in this exhibition, you'll get to see here on the left-hand side, we have a menu. So if you were traveling on Swiss Air and you were sitting in first class, you would have received a menu. And what's so fun about this is it was printed on a beautiful kerchief. So you would have received this. It's something you could have taken home with you. And not only did it have the menu, but it had all these beautiful designs on it as well. So that's something you could have kept as a memento. And if you wanted to, that's something you also could have worn or carried in your purse. It's a little hard to see, but in the upper left-hand corner in this photo as well, we have two miniature salt and pepper shakers. So I'm not sure if the intent was to take these home, but Miss O'Keeffe certainly did. And these she received from Braniff International. Now, TWA, which no longer is in existence, offered their guests this little travel coin purse that you could have taken home with you. And Pan Am, which also no longer exists, has this wonderful little hand fan that has a map highlighting all of the airline routes all over the globe that you could have chosen from. And again, here on the right-hand side, we have that beautiful Japan Airlines portfolio with all of the matchbooks and your Japan Airlines stationery. Now, in the center here, these are actually two brochures that Miss O'Keeffe received from Donald L. Ferguson, which was a travel agency based here in Santa Fe. Now, during this time, working with travel agencies to plan your trip was very, very common. And not only did they help you with airfare and help you with lodging, they actually would offer you an itinerary with many different activities that you could choose to participate in. And they also worked with local embassies in whichever destination you're traveling to create opportunities to meet some of the locals, as well as socialize and get to know your travel companions. So at the embassy, you might be invited to a mixer where perhaps you would meet local dignitaries, important business owners, and of course, whoever was traveling in your group was sure to be a selection of very interesting and sophisticated people as well. So right here, we have an opportunity to break down one of the most pervasive myths about Georgia O'Keeffe. Although she did appreciate privacy and she did enjoy her solitude, she was by no means antisocial. Whenever she traveled internationally, she always traveled with friends. She never traveled on her own, even though while she was traveling, she would go off and kind of have her own experiences, but she liked to travel with friends. And while she was traveling, she actually maintained correspondence through letter writing and through postcards. And that's really how we know about the different travels that Miss O'Keeffe took. As far as we know, she did not keep any kind of diary or any kind of journal about her travels. What we're able to piece together is based on the itineraries that she kept, as well as the correspondence that she sent during her trips. So when traveling during this time period, there were certainly different, what I like to call travel gear that you would want to take with you to make sure that your travel was comfortable. So although Keefe was traveling to some very far destinations off the beaten path, and although we know she did enjoy roughing it, especially with all of her camping experience, traveling was meant to be comfortable. So here we have the travel alarm clock that she would have brought with her in her bag. And we have as well a little brochure about tipping abroad. Now, this is something that was created by TWA. Airlines were creating a lot of different collateral to encourage people to travel, not only travel in groups, but there was even an effort to encourage women to travel on their own. Now, this would be your guide to tipping that you could keep in your purse. And to the right of that, we have these 3 small cards that say Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. And on these cards, what you see right here on the front, these are the standard, excuse me. These are the standard conversion rates. So it would be easy for you to do some quick conversion if you pulled this card out of your purse. On the other side of these cards are common phrases you might need during your travels. One of my favorite phrases on the card, if you were in a taxi, there was a phrase that would tell the driver, please slow down, please speed up. I think we're lost. So really everything you needed to communicate and generally get around, this was a quick little guide that you could keep on you. Now, also in this photo, we have an immersion heater. That's that small metal object kind of in the center of the photo. And along with that, we also have a voltage adapter. So when you were traveling, you would need an adapter to be able to use these gadgets wherever it was that you were traveling to. And an immersion heater was a great thing to bring with you because as long as you had access to electricity and you had access to water, you could make yourself tea or coffee. Now, some of the objects that she held on to, postcards, photographs, and more. So here in the case below these photos in the exhibition, we have a selection of hand fans that O'Keeffe took with her back to Abiquiu from her travels. Now, it's not that she necessarily set out and told herself that, yes, I'm going to be a collector of hand fans, but it seemed to be a very common object, a common souvenir that she found regardless of where she was in the world. And so she actually amassed quite a collection. One thing that was really challenging when putting this exhibition together was picking and choosing which items would make it into the exhibition, because we have a limited amount of space and we also have to be thoughtful about how delicate an object is as far as whether we'll be placing it into the case for the public to see. So I did have a selection here of about 6 fans, but there were many, many more to choose from. Throughout this talk, I'm going to show you both objects that are in the exhibition, as well as some objects that were not able to be in the exhibition, either due to space, size, or the fragility of the object. Here we also have a selection of travel photography. This was actually a challenge for me to find travel photos, because often when O'Keeffe would travel, she would just purchase postcards. The thinking at the time was, why spend the effort and take a photo when you could just purchase a postcard and have a beautiful, professionally done photograph right there? And I can tell you from the dozens and dozens of blank postcards that she held on to, Miss O'Keeffe certainly was a believer in this. You're also going to see quite an array of souvenirs. Now, O'Keeffe would travel, and upon her return, she would take back with her just many different items, whether it was receipts, brochures, maps, newspaper clippings, notes that were written down on hotel stationery or airline stationery, photographs, and other items. And she would put all these papers into different boxes. And then she would label each box with the country that she had visited. So here in these photographs, we have a couple boxes from her trip to India. We have boxes from Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, as well as Japan. Unfortunately, these boxes could not be in the exhibition due to their very fragile nature. But what I loved about this is I think this is such a relatable practice. I myself, when I travel, I'm known to just pick up all different pieces of paper when I'm traveling, and then of course, taking them home and placing them in a box, in a binder, or in some sort of scrapbook so that you're able to go back and reminisce about your travels. Now, because George O'Keeffe did not keep any sort of journal or diary, we don't know exactly why she collected the objects that she did. But we can assume that all the objects that she collected, she ascribed her own personal meaning to them. And in selecting all of these objects, she in fact made herself her own travel archive. And with this travel archive, it allowed her the ability to go back and think about the travels, look at the mementos, call up specific instances, specific memories, specific experiences, and allowed her to do what we would call some armchair traveling when she was back here in New Mexico. So she could kind of place herself back in the many travels that she did over the course of her lifetime. Also not in the exhibition, but definitely something that takes up quite a bit of space in Miss O'Keeffe's personal library are travel books. So at the time, travel writing was very, very popular. This is something that actually picked up much, much earlier in the 700s and especially in the 1800s. And so, of course, as more and more people here in the United States began to travel internationally, there was a much larger audience for these books to be marketed to. And here we have a couple books that Miss O'Keeffe had, one on Cusco and one on Central America. So O'Keeffe actually traveled to Peru, to Mexico, to Costa Rica. So she was traveling around in Latin America and to read these books before her travels allowed her to prepare for her trips. And looking at these books after her travels allowed her again to sort of go through her memories and experience that travel all over again. Now, here are a few examples of postcards that didn't make it into the exhibition. We do have about a dozen postcards on view, but again, there were just so many to choose from. So we have a postcard from Tokyo on the left-hand side, this postcard from Thailand in the middle, and this postcard from Iran on the right. So why take the time taking the photograph yourself when you could just purchase a professionally done photograph and take that with you instead? Now, also in her travel boxes, there were dozens and dozens of brochures. Now, what's so beautiful about these brochures, in addition to the design, is you're really getting some insight into how these countries were actively promoting tourism and encouraging people from around the world to come visit them. So we have this postcard from Istanbul, a postcard from Greece, Lebanon, and from India. And these these brochures really became very common, especially as tourism departments grew in these different countries, and tourism itself was becoming its own industry. So this increase in air travel goes hand in hand with the development of these tourism departments in countries all over the world. Now, luckily, we do have some wonderful photos of O'Keeffe traveling, and you can see more of these if you come see the exhibition here in Abiquiu. On the left is a photo of Miss O'Keeffe on a camel, hands down, one of my favorite photos. This is from a trip that she took to Morocco later in life. Here on the right-hand side, we have Miss O'Keeffe traveling in Egypt. I love that she's wearing head wraps in both of these photos. Now, the woman on the right here in this photo from Egypt is wearing a much more Western style of clothing. But Miss O'Keeffe really continued to wear her wrap dresses and embraced the headscarves when she traveled, which of course made sense since a lot of these places had high temperatures, just like we do here in New Mexico. Here is another photo. This is a photo of Miss O'Keeffe in Iran, standing in front of a mosque. And I love the candid nature of this photo because we have a local gentleman on the left-hand side waltzing into the photo as Miss O'Keeffe is posing. And here again, she's wearing one of her wrap dresses along with her well-known belt by Aguilar. And so even as she's traveling, she's still really embodying her very iconic style, which just goes to show that the way she dressed, it was not only for fashion, it was also very practical and very functional, especially when she was abroad in these hot climates. Now, she loved textiles. I think that's an understatement. I'm sure if you've been a member with us for a while, you've seen mention of many of the clothes. Maybe you've seen the Living Modern exhibition when that was traveling several years ago. And it was no different when she would travel. She loved purchasing not only wearable textiles, but also bolts of fabric, as you see here in this photo. So these two bolts of fabric, she purchased these when she was in Japan, and she brought these back to the United States. And what I love about this is that she's using Japanese fabric to then create a very Western style outfit. So the blouse and skirt on the right, that is a dress that it's created to look similar to a very common design at the time called the Hollywood girl outfit. That's a style of dress that was coming out of California. And here she worked with the seamstress to use this Japanese lightweight cotton fabric to create this very Western style outfit. Also here we have a couple scarves that she purchased while abroad. The cream color scarf with the mermaid motif. We believe that she purchased this on her trip to Fiji. And this black scarf with the white block print design, we believe she purchased this on her trip to India. Now, when you would travel abroad in this period, and people still do it today, not only did you buy bolts of fabric, scarves, ready-made clothes, but often your trip would include a trip to the tailor. So here we have a label from a tailor, J.S. Wong, based in Hong Kong. And because so many Americans were traveling abroad, tailors were very happy to create Western style clothes for their customers using their local fabrics. So on the left here, we have the top half of a suit. This jacket is very Western style, although we see here that it does have a mandarin collar. And along with this jacket, there would have been a pencil skirt that went with it. So these are suits that Miss O'Keeffe had custom made for herself when she was in Hong Kong, and then continued to wear when she came back here to the United States. Now, on the right, we have a different example of what you might order for yourself when you were visiting the tailor. Here we have a much more traditional style jacket. So this beautiful silk brocade fabric on the outside is very traditional. I love that there is this pop of red with the silk red lining. If you've ever been on a tour of the home and studio here in Abiquiu, you've surely noticed that Miss O'Keeffe loved a pop of color, often going with a bright red, a bright orange, or a bright blue. And Miss O'Keeffe here opts for a traditional, it's called like a frog tassel. So that's sort of clasp, as well as a mandarin collar. Now, it's unlikely that she wore this in her day-to-day, but certainly a beautiful piece of clothing to have in your wardrobe. Now, traveling to East Asia at this time, it was very common for Western tourists to purchase kimonos. Now, kimonos had been very popular in Europe in the 1800s. That continues to hold over today when Westerners travel to East Asia. And here we have a beautiful example of a kimono with a hand-painted image of Mount Fuji on it. And so this is a kimono that you can see in our exhibition here. And at the time, often when people traveled, they were purchasing these very high-end, expensive kimonos made of high-quality fabrics, lots of detail, often very ornate. And we believe that this is not necessarily a kimono that O'Keeffe wore often. It was more so a souvenir for her to keep as a memento. And of course, a beautiful example of craftsmanship. Now, O'Keeffe ended up purchasing a few kimonos here. Now, these are called yukata. And yukata are lightweight cotton kimonos that were often worn in the summertime. And Miss O'Keeffe really took a liking to these. And so these became her house coats. Now, this was not typical for tourists to purchase when they were abroad, but Miss O'Keeffe loved the very simple style, the lightweight fabric. And again, here in New Mexico, it gets really hot in the summer, so perfect for wearing around the house. These two kimonos, they are not in the exhibition, and that is because we currently have them on view in Miss O'Keeffe's closet in her Abiquiu home. So if you go on a tour of the home and studio, you'll have an opportunity to see these two beautiful kimonos close up. Now, these are two examples of textiles that we were not able to fit in the exhibition, but they're just so beautiful. And here on the right, we believe that this is a pashmina, likely from Turkey, with this ornate design. And then on the left-hand side is a textile that she brought back from Japan. And so I really cannot emphasize how many souvenirs Miss O'Keeffe took home with her. It was impossible to fit them all in the exhibition, but it's very clear that she especially gravitates towards textiles. I would say overwhelmingly, the majority of souvenirs that she brought back with her were textiles, whether it was clothing or rugs or fabric. So on the left-hand side, if you come see this exhibition, you'll get to see some of the highlights of the souvenirs that she brought back with her from Japan. Hanging above, we have a reproduction of her painting of Mount Fuji, and a mountain that, of course, really inspired her. And down below, we have a selection of this object here towards the front of the case. It's called a biobu. And so this is a tabletop folding screen. Now, this is something that perhaps would have gone in a recess in the wall, what we here in New Mexico called a nicho. And so Miss O'Keefe brought back a couple of those, and on them they have beautiful examples of Japanese nature drawing. We also have these sandals. Now, these are very typical sandals. They used to be worn by geishas, and they're called gita. And so these are not sandals that Miss O'Keefe purchased to wear around the desert. These are, again, objects that she really considered a memento, a souvenir. So although not everything made it into her day-to-day life, not everything was worn by her, she still held on to these objects for the entirety of her life. So we have to assume that she had ascribed some personal meaning to these objects. Down below, we have an example of a tanugi, which is this textile that is actually advertising a restaurant. It's a little hard to see in this image, but there are animals grilling fish, potentially drinking some sake and playing some music. And in the far back corner, we have some rolls of paper. Now, these could have been purchased to use as art supplies, although Miss O'Keefe never used them, instead holding on to them just to admire the beautiful design and craftsmanship of this handmade paper. Here on the right, again, we have the two scarves that I showed already, the one on the left from India and the one on the right from Fiji. And in the center, we have a beautiful jacket that is from Mexico. Now, this is a jacket that she did wear quite frequently. This certainly made it into her rotation. And in the case below, we have some very typical souvenir objects. We have a beautiful pair of velvet shoes that are from Italy. We don't think that she ever wore them. There's no sign of wear and tear on the shoes, but again, potentially holding on to them and just admiring the craftsmanship. Same thing goes with this seashell necklace in the middle. She traveled to quite a few places with beaches, with seashells, so we're not exactly sure where she would have picked that up. And on the right-hand side, we have a few silver pins that she purchased in Peru, as well as a small black leather coin purse that has Mexico embossed on it, and a small kerchief with some embroidery that says Korea. Here's a close-up of the purse from Mexico. Beautiful detailing on the embossment here on the leather. We have another close-up of the Gita sandals. As you can see, the craftsmanship is also really significant here on the bottom of the shoes. We have this silver lotus flower, as well as you can see this beautiful rope design here on the shoes. And again, a look at these velvet shoes from Italy that are lined with this gorgeous golden silk. And here is a close-up of a couple of the pins that she purchased on her travels to Peru. Now, when you were traveling, I think probably one of the biggest challenges was figuring out how you fit everything in your suitcase. And the simple answer is you didn't. When you would travel, you would often ship your souvenirs, ship your purchases back home. And so here we have the lid of a package that Miss O'Keefe sent herself from a hotel in Japan. And as somebody who currently lives in Abiquiu, I love that there's no address, there's no P.O. box. She simply had to write Georgia O'Keefe, Abiquiu, and she knew it would get to her. Now, this is an object that didn't make it into the exhibition, but I think it's just such a beautiful example of how mail was really used to help circulate these objects around the world. And it was a great way also to have a memento because she held on to this box lid. You have these stamps up in the corner, the stamps down below. It's really just wonderful to look at. Now, when O'Keeffe would travel, she would not only bring home these objects, she'd also bring home some design inspiration. Now, I mentioned her first trip to East Asia was in 1959. And on that trip, she traveled to an antique store in Thailand. And in this antique store, she was able to purchase this Buddha's hand that right now, we believe it's from potentially the 12th to 14th century. And this bronze Buddha hand is in the mudra that means fear not. Instead of having this Buddha's hand sitting in a box packed away in storage, Miss O'Keeffe decided to have it embedded directly into the adobe wall of her bedroom. So if you come again on a tour of the Abiquiu home and studio, you'll have an opportunity to enter her bedroom, see this Buddha's hand as it's embedded into the wall the way Miss O'Keeffe intended. And the fact that this mudra, or the symbol the Buddha's hand is in, means fear not, it was a reminder when Miss O'Keeffe woke up in the morning to go out and to live her life boldly. Now, if you come to the exhibition in the Welcome Center, we do have a reproduction of that Buddha's hand. And here on the left, we have this beautiful photo of the patio at the Abiquiu home and studio. While she was in Japan, Miss O'Keeffe visited many Zen gardens, and she took a liking to the aesthetics of bonsai trees. So when she returned, she hired a gentleman from Santa Fe to come up to Abiquiu, and she asked him to prune all of the juniper bushes and all of the sage bushes into the style of a bonsai tree. And her gardener knew how much she enjoyed that trip. And so in the morning, he would go out and he would actually rake the sand in the patio into different designs so she could have that feeling of being in the Zen garden. I think this is an important place to note that sometimes these objects are being taken out of their original cultural context. And sometimes these practices are being taken out of their original cultural context as well. So when O'Keeffe is bringing this back here to New Mexico, it's not necessarily about replicating the authentic practice of bonsai. It's more about appreciating the aesthetics and, again, having the ability to sort of return to those travel experiences, return to those memories in a way that was meaningful for her on an individual level. So in addition to the Buddha's hand, she also, when she was traveling in Central America, she purchased a few ceramic heads that were made in a Mesoamerican style, specifically for tourists to purchase. And here we see one of them embedded directly into the wall in the hallway between the patio and the motor court at the Abiquiu home and studio. What I love about this is that these small little figurines really look like they're just growing right out of the adobe. It looks like they were meant to be there all along. And they also can take you by surprise. A lot of visitors don't realize that they're there until we point them out. And this is a great example of how Miss O'Keeffe really took her memories, took her experiences, and used that in a lot of the designs that the interior design choices that she's making here at her home in Abiquiu. And in the exhibition in the Welcome Center, we've chosen to have a reproduction of Miss O'Keeffe's dining table. And we have this set up with a blue teapot and blue teacups that we believe she purchased in Japan. And above her dining room table in her Abiquiu home, she has a paper lantern created by the Japanese-American artist Isamu Noguchi. And here we see that she really has this appreciation for tea. On the table, we also have a copy of the Book of Tea. This book of essays is something she would have actually read before she traveled to Japan. Her interest in East Asian art and culture started well before she actually traveled there. She, as a younger artist, was really influenced by the art and design of East Asia, often traveling to see exhibitions, purchasing books. And so it's very apparent that these trips to East Asia really impacted her personal style as well as the design of her home. And again, just saying that the Book of Tea, Akakura's essay on the Japanese tea ceremony. So O'Keeffe first read that book in 1946, a good 13 years before she actually travels to Japan. One of my favorite objects I found that she would have kept in her travel box is this brochure. It's a guide to green tea. It was something that was produced for English-speaking tourists. It speaks a little bit about how green tea is harvested, what's the right way to prepare green tea, and then what's the right way to consume green tea. And so if you come visit us at the Welcome Center, we do have copies of that we are sharing with our guests. And I will go ahead and end with this quote right here. In 1968, O'Keeffe wrote, "I go around the world to see what's there and to see if I'm in the right place." And although O'Keeffe traveled all around the world, 49 countries, that's more countries than many people will ever travel to in their lifetime, she always returned to Abiquiu. And although she enjoyed the novel experiences of travel, the cultural exchange, the inspiration, she knew in her heart that Abiquiu was her home and Abiquiu was the right place to be. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the presentation, and I'm more than happy to spend the next 15 minutes or so answering questions.
Thank you so much, Giustina. That was wonderful. We have a good amount of questions in the Q&A, and I'm sure as you answer more, we'll keep trickling in. So feel free to, for those listening in, to send them. We can start with a question from Marisol, who asks, will there be a book related to this exhibition and or the one about her home/things?
So there will not be a book about this exhibition. Although if you are interested in more about the design of O'Keeffe's Abiquiu home and studio, we do sell a book in the store, the O'Keeffe in Her Houses. And in that book, it does speak to some of the ways that travel inspired the design of her home. So you can get a little more insight through that book.
Nice, thank you. Barbara asks or says, I've toured the Abiquiu home and studio and noted the spare minimal style she lived in. Where did she store all the artifacts and souvenirs, art and art books, as well as nature items she collected over the years?
That's a great question. And we get this question a lot when visitors are touring the home and studio because it does look so sparse. And I think the key is that even though we often call Miss O'Keeffe a minimalist, she certainly owned a lot of things. She had a lot of clothes, a lot of shoes, a lot of souvenirs, a lot of books, and her whole strategy was to make sure that these things were sort of hidden. So although we don't open it to the public, there is a room at the Abiquiu home and studio that we call the book room. Inside the book room is Miss O'Keeffe's personal library. Now, we're not able to open that room to the public because a lot of the books in that space are incredibly fragile, but that room was used for storage for her travel boxes, a lot of the mementos that she brought back. She also had a lot of guest rooms with closets, and so those closets were often filled with her belongings. And also you have to keep in mind that she had both the home here in in Abiquiu. And then 13 miles down the road, she also had the home at Ghost Ranch. So a lot of these ceramics, for example, that she would bring back with her, those would be stored in her cupboards. And she had 2 kitchens and 2 large pantries. So she had plenty of space to sort of spread these things out. And so even though when you see her home, it looks so clean and so organized, you may have noticed, for example, in the studio, when you walk into the studio on the right-hand side, there's some shelving and there are white sheets hanging in front of the shelving. And so anytime she didn't want to look at storage, she would get creative and hang up some white sheets or hang up some curtains. So that way she could continue to have that illusion of minimalism, even though she owned quite a bit.
That's so smart.
Yes.
Thank you. Another question from Lisa. She's asking about the dining table. Is it inspired by one of her travels, or could you tell us a little more about it?
Sure. So that dining table is a table of Miss O'Keeffe's own design. And when you look at the table, I think it has a somewhat Japanese aesthetic, if you're familiar with Japanese furniture and design. So I do think that it does have some of that inspiration. But again, this is what I love so much about Georgia O'Keeffe, is that she is always combining different aesthetics, different life experiences, and putting these things together. So that table is a more, I'll say like a more complex version of the table that you would find in her kitchen or in her studio. So Georgia O'Keeffe grew up on a dairy farm in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. And on the farm, her dad would often take a piece of wood, throw it on top of 2 sawhorses, and boom, you have a table. So that was really the basis for the dining room table, but you can see that she's really elevated it by adding the hinged pieces of plywood on the bottom. And so it kind of lends itself to that Japanese furniture aesthetic.
Thank you. So neat. I think another question, really interesting, from Paula, is asking if there's any information on what kinds of food she ate while traveling.
So unfortunately, we have less information about that. And that is because she did not keep any sort of diary or journal while she was traveling. But when you look through you're able to look into our online library catalog, and we have cataloged Miss O'Keeffe's personal library books. And what you'll see is that she did have quite a selection of international cookbooks. So even though this was probably not informing her day-to-day diet because she ate very simply, I do assume that when she traveled, she tried new foods and she liked it enough in order to buy cookbooks inspired by the cuisine of the different places that she traveled to.
Thanks. A question I've run into a bit when talking about her travels. Tracy asks, are there references in letters or postcards sent to friends or family of Miss O'Keeffe regarding travel advisories put out for certain countries? Because I know personally, I've been asked specifically about like Vietnam in the time that she traveled there. So are there any references to that in any of your research or experience?
Not in the research that I've done. Of course, that doesn't mean that that doesn't exist. But, I think one of the biggest challenges when researching this type of exhibition is you can only base the information off of the materials we do have. And so I didn't find anything along those lines when it came to the postcards or the letters that she wrote while she was traveling. Now, you have to keep in mind that when she would send these postcards, oftentimes these friends just held on to the postcards themselves. We don't always have copies of that here at the O'Keeffe Museum. Often the copies we do have, it's because she was writing to her family members and then they donated these postcards after the fact. So it can be a little difficult to kind of trace these correspondence. And if I could go back in time, I would ask Miss O'Keefe to please keep a journal, because I actually have a lot of questions about what her experiences were like.
Thank you. Ryan asks, do we know if she visited many other artists in their homes or studios around the world?
Oh, that's a great question. So often when she was traveling as part of a travel agency itinerary, she may have been meeting artists, but through the context of a gallery or through a museum. She wasn't necessarily meeting up with these artists when she was traveling abroad. I think, of course, there are some exceptions, like when she traveled to Mexico, she did meet Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. But often when she was traveling, it was really sticking with this very jam-packed itinerary, and it was doing a lot more of the typical sightseeing that you would imagine one would do when they travel. And often for her, part of the joy there was traveling to museums and getting to see some of these objects in person that she had only previously seen in art books, either growing up or as an art student or as a young artist herself.
Thank you. George asks, or it says, what a great lecture. We'll definitely take a little trip to see the exhibit. Did you find any hints to her favorite destinations? I see so much Japanese influences in George's art and style.
Yes, so she never outright said she had a favorite, but based on the amount of souvenirs and mementos and items, I would have to say Japan seemed to be one of her favorite places that she traveled. She did go back more than once, and so I think that too also suggests that she really enjoyed her time there. And the very fact that she came back and painted Mount Fuji, that too, I think, suggests that that was a really meaningful trip. I would also say that Peru really stood out for her. That's a trip where I found a lot of materials on Peru, on Machu Picchu, and that's a place where she went back more than once. And same goes for Mexico. Mexico is a place she traveled to very often. And if you visit the Abiquiu home and studio, you'll see that throughout the house, there are a lot of examples of Mexican ceramics and other objects throughout the home that she really incorporated into her day-to-day life. One of my favorite being the very large wash basin from Oaxaca that is on display in the zaguan underneath the elk skull. So I would say, just based on the number of things she owned and the number of times she went back, those were probably her favorite places she visited.
Very cool. Thank you. A couple minutes now left, just letting everyone know, get their questions in. Connie asks, she didn't take photos upon arrival, but did she take aerial photos that resulted in some of her paintings, such as the rivers and clouds that she's painted from up above?
So as far as I know, those paintings are not based on photographs, but actually based on sketches that she took while she was on the plane. So I even was able to see some stationery that had some early sketches on them from being up in the plane. And so it's not necessarily based on a photograph, but she liked to just sort of sketch out what it was that she was looking at. And then she took that home with her and then was able to paint solely based on that sketch that she had made while she was on the plane.
Thank you. S. Bauer asks, do you have any souvenirs or items from her travels to Hawaii in 1939 when she was commissioned by Dole Pineapple Company to go there and produce works for marketing campaigns?
Yes, we do. So I think another challenge for me with this exhibition was limiting the scope. because O'Keeffe traveled a lot within the United States, and including her trip to Hawaii. And so we had a lot of seashells that we knew were from her trip to Hawaii. We had some other objects we think were from her trip to Hawaii. And we also have a lot of souvenirs that she had purchased when traveling around the Southwest. But in order to kind of keep it within reason, I had to limit it to only international travel.
Makes sense. That'd be a big exhibition.
Yes.
Here we have another from Christina. Does the exhibit showcase some of her artwork inspired by her travels? Thank you for the wonderful discussion.
So here at the Welcome Center, you won't find original artwork by Georgia O'Keeffe. To see that artwork, you do have to go to the museum in Santa Fe, but we have that reproduction of Mount Fuji, as well as a large mural style reproduction of Sky Above Clouds, one of the paintings she did after flying in an airplane and being able to look down onto the clouds from up above. And so I always suggest that if you're going to see the exhibition at the Welcome Center in Abiquiu, go ahead and go to the museum in Santa Fe as well, so you can actually see the original artwork in person. That's going to really be the most, I'd say, in-depth way to experience the show.
Thank you, Giustina. Anna asks, do you know how many paintings she created from her Peru visit?
That is a good question. I do not have the number off the top of my head. I believe it was only a few, but I'm not going to make a formal guess. Sorry about that.
Thank you. It happens. There's way too much. Here we have, do you know where anyone could find a list of her travel books? This comes from Joan.
A list of the travel books. So again, our library catalog does have all the majority of O'Keeffe's personal library cataloged, but you can also go to our collections online. We have a lot of the books listed on our collections online as well. So although you're not able to go inside of the book room, and a lot of those books are not available, you can still see our list online.
I think getting to our last couple questions here. George asks, do you have any idea of how many people she would travel with and who her companions were?
Yes. So often she would just travel with one other person when she was doing these larger trips, like her trip around the world. When she's traveling much more internationally, she's typically traveling with one other person. Betty Pinkerton was one of her most frequent travel companions, but she also did travel later in life a lot with Juan Hamilton. She also traveled with Alexander Gerard and Susan Gerard. Alexander Gerard, who is known for collecting folk art from around the world, and you can see the folk art that he collected at the Folk Art Museum in Santa Fe, which is a beautiful exhibition if you haven't seen it. And so she was always traveling with one or two people. But what I thought was so interesting is that the representative from the travel agency would write to her. And they would say, Miss O'Keeffe, we have this trip planned to such and such country. And, we'd really love you to participate. And we want to assure you we have just a great selection of people going on this trip. So when you would sign up for the trip, in addition to your itinerary, you would actually get a list of all of the other participants in the trip. And it would have a little spiel about who they were and what they do. And so part of what the travel agency was doing was not just organizing an itinerary, but really trying to create a holistic experience, and thinking about who it is you're traveling with, who you might find interesting. It was a very different way to travel than we do nowadays for the most part.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Giustina. I think very last question before we sign off is, can you tell us anything about any upcoming exhibitions at the Welcome Center?
Yeah, so this exhibition is on view until April 1st, 2024. And then we have not formally announced it, but we are in the works, planning on having an exhibition looking at Georgia O'Keeffe's relationship with the mid-century furniture designers, as well as a deep dive into the furnishings she has both at her Abiquiu home and her Ghost Ranch home. So definitely a little different than what we have going on this year, but I'm really excited to kind of look at those relationships and look at the specific furnishings that O'Keeffe picked for her home.
That is super exciting. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to now sign off. It's 10 a.m. Any other pressing questions, please feel free to email us at learning@o'keeffemuseum.org. So sorry if we couldn't get to them, but thank you for joining us today. And thank you again, Giustina, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.